Hello, and thank you for joining us today for our April VISTA member webinar, Approaching Project and Community Work with Humility. My name is Stephen Bronskill. I'm a training specialist for AmeriCorps VISTA. I'm an AmeriCorps alum, and I'm so excited to be your host for today's webinar. Today, I'm joined by Lisa Reitmeyer, who lives in Portland, Oregon, works as a writer, educator, and trainer for nonprofit organizations across the nation. She served as both an AmeriCorps member in New York City and a Peace Corps volunteer in Burkina Faso. We're so excited to have Lisa join us today. I'll share a little bit about our agenda and I'll pass it over to her. So we hope you'll leave today's webinar with an understanding of how cultural humility differs from cultural competence, as well as some practical strategies for practicing cultural humility at your VISTA project. Throughout the session, we'll be working through a session handout that we'll post in the chat. I also emailed this out to you this morning if you want to take a look at your email. We'll also share a version of the Word document in the chat. We hope this is a helpful way for you to record your ideas, but we understand if you'd prefer to write down your thoughts on a piece of paper or just think through things in your head and come back to it later. It's totally no pressure. We just hope it's a helpful resource. And as always, we're here to support you throughout and after the webinar. So let us know if you have any questions or having any difficulties. With that, I want to bring in our special guest, Lisa. Lisa, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Stephen. And hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be with you all today to discuss this topic, cultural humility. Thanks for all of your comments in the chat. It sounds like a lot of people have a somewhat good already basic understanding of this topic, and I hope today will help give some more nuance to that and to help you think about applying it to your practice, a practice that can help all of us create inclusive, collaborative, and equitable communities in both our personal and our professional lives. So cultural humility as a term was coined in 1998 by healthcare professionals Melanie Turvalon and John Marie Garcia. While the term was originally intended for the healthcare industry, other sectors recognized the relevance it had to their own work and adopted it. So to begin, let's get a working definition of the term out on the table so we can understand what we mean by cultural humility. To be culturally humble is to respect other people's values and beliefs while continuously reflecting on your own biases alongside social power imbalances. Cultural humility is an ongoing practice of self-critique combined with a willingness to learn from others in order to continually learn. It's a lifelong process of asking yourself how your own biases might impact how you understand and treat others while working to minimize that impact. It's relevant if you're working in a new community or if you're working in a community you come from and know well. It requires each of us to ask ourselves, how does who I am and where I come from impact how I will teach, learn, research, and engage with other people and communities? Also, it recognizes power dynamics, the imbalances that may exist within those structures, and it works to hold those institutions accountable in partnership with the people and the groups affected. In order to effectively practice cultural humility, we have to engage in enough introspection to know when our ability to practice it might be tested. Here are some examples of what cultural humility is not. This list might not seem controversial, but if we're honest with ourselves, rejecting all of the things on this list all of the time is harder than we'd like to believe it is. Our values and beliefs will inevitably get tested. And how will we react? The first step is to see the ways in which our own values and beliefs influence the way we perceive others. Then we work to maintain a posture of openness and curiosity. It is not always easy. Mistakes will be made, and that's okay. The great thing about cultural humility is that it acknowledges that no one can get it right all of the time. Maintaining a posture of cultural humility is a lifelong process. You might have heard the term cultural competence before. To be culturally competent is to learn about other cultures, control your biases, and adapt your behaviors and communication styles. At face value, cultural competency sounds ideal, but it may actually lead us to rely on generalizations about certain groups. So to combat those generalizations, we'll be focusing today on cultural humility, which in contrast to cultural competence, seeks to recognize the uniqueness of each individual. Cultural competence is finite, while cultural humility is infinite. Cultural competency values learned knowledge over experience, while cultural humility values self-reflection and the ability to see everyone around you as a complex, multidimensional being. Finally, cultural competency promotes self-advocacy, while cultural humility values partnerships. For now, I'm going to pass it back over to Stephen for a quick chat question.
Yeah, Lisa, thank you so much. And it's great to see everyone introducing themselves in the chat. Amazing to see folks from all across the country serving in VISTA. We want to hear from you again in the chat. Putting this on the screen as well. I want you to think about this and share an example. What are cultural examples of things we can see versus things we cannot see? So it's a little bit of a challenging question. One example of something we can see in culture might be art. But something unseen might be cultural family values. So I want you to take a moment and put your answers in the chat. This could be something at your VISTA project. It might be something in your community or from your life. But what are some cultural examples of things we can see versus things we cannot see? So I appreciate Cal sharing life experience. Yeah, difficult probably to see that. Food, that's a great one, Belinda. Cultural things we can see, attire, community involvement. Thanks, Jaylene. Unseen trauma. Thanks, Devin. I want to bring Lisa into this conversation as well, because I think these are some wonderful examples coming into the chat. I really appreciate everyone contributing to this conversation. Lisa is going to share a helpful way of thinking about this concept here, but Lisa, any from the chat that you're seeing jump out to you?
Yes, to all of them. A lot of people are mentioning hairstyles and just one's appearance, right? One's physical appearance and the way that that seeps into our judgment of people, right? It's a really human thing and it's really pervasive. But when we're practicing cultural humility, it's a great opportunity to check ourselves when we're seeing what's just right there in front of us. So yeah, but parenting styles, I like that one, Noelle. Yeah, I mean, those vary widely.
Yeah, these are great. Keep them coming. Again, I'm going to pass back to Lisa to share some helpful tools to bring this into our VISTA project.
It can be helpful to think about culture as an iceberg. What's above the line are our perceptions, and what's below the line are our assumptions. Above the lines are the things as about a culture we can see, read, or watch. And below the lines are the things about a culture we can't see: values, beliefs, and history, parenting styles, for example. It's likely obvious to all of you, having seen my picture at the beginning of this presentation, for example, that I'm a female presenting white person, but it would not be obvious to you based on my picture what religious beliefs I hold, if any. So cultural humility challenges us to take this holistic approach and combine the things we can see and learn about the things we can't. It invites us to learn about what's both above and below the line of the iceberg. And we do that by listening, asking questions, and developing relationships with others. The self-exploration part of cultural humility is critical. There are basic questions we can ask ourselves. Questions like, how do I describe my own ethnicity, race, religion, gender, and sexual orientation? These are the parts of ourselves that might lie above the line of the proverbial iceberg, though not all of the time, of course. Beyond those, however, lie aspects of our identity that aren't visible, are obvious, things like our most closely held values, or aspects of ourselves that we definitely want or definitely don't want others to know about us. Those questions matter just as much as the more obvious identifiers. So understanding the complexity of human experience allows us to begin the deep work of understanding how who we are will influence how we work. Cultural humility can help us counter assumptions and turn them into opportunities for engagement, relationship building, and learning.
Yeah, Lisa, thank you so much. I can see from the chat just how this group of VISTA members has really been thoughtful about all of these concepts. We really want to give you an opportunity to apply this to your project. So want to take a moment to reflect on what Lisa shared so far, what we've discussed in the chat. In the chat, you'll find a link to the handout for today's session. I mentioned this at the front. It was emailed out this morning if you registered in advance. We'll also share a Word document version. Sometimes that link is helpful if you log into the VISTA campus. In any case, if you're having any difficulty, we will get this to you in some way. You're welcome to just do this on a piece of paper in your head, just taking a moment to reflect. On the first page, there's a question for you to respond to. And the question is, what is an example of an event, activity, or situation at your project site where you think a mindset of cultural humility would be helpful? And feel free to work in the iceberg, the concepts Lisa just shared here. We're going to keep the Q&A and the chat open if you'd like to share anything from what you're writing down or ask any questions, but we're actually going to give you a little bit of peace and quiet here. We'll play some light music for about 2 minutes for you to reflect about what part of your project site you really want to focus in today on today's webinar, where a cultural humility mindset would be helpful. So again, when you're finished, feel free to share your thoughts in the chat, but we'll share some music. All right. Great job, everyone. I want to encourage you to keep reflecting, to keep sharing in the chat. I understand this is a pretty short amount of time, but really hope you had an opportunity to think through what lens do you want to take this information from Lisa and through this training and apply it to your site today. There's some wonderful things in the chat. I want to let Lisa shout some of these out, but I saw everything from, working with folks might have a different language than a VISTA member, working with job coaches in different communities, dealing with a pride event. These are wonderful. And I think if you take a moment too to scroll through to see your colleagues across the country, you may see people experiencing similar challenges to you. So we really hope at the end of this session, we've got some concrete tools for you to apply to these situations. We really appreciate you taking time to reflect. Keep this document open. We're going to come back to it one more time. We hope it's useful for you moving forward as well. I'm going to pass it back to Lisa if there's anything in the chat that you see that you want to shout out and continue sharing this great information.
Well, yeah, I was noticing Thomas talking about how he works at an organization to promote financial literacy. And he's doing some self-reflection here, thinking about how some of what he teaches is obvious to him, but then recognizing that likely it's obvious because he has a college degree in finance. So that's the kind of self-reflection that that cultural humility really asks us to do, to understand why we know what we know and how that influences how we talk to other people about what we know. So just him recognizing that other people don't have degrees in finance is a great place to start. So thanks, Thomas, for that.
Thanks, Lisa. Well, I'll let you take it away here.
Sure, yeah. So cultural humility is a personal practice with big implications. It can allow us to build, like I said, these inclusive, collaborative, and more equitable environments. But it requires those of us who teach to understand that we don't know it all. It requires those of us who work as helpers to understand we're the person that at times that might need the help. And it requires those of us who are highly educated, well-trained, and well-intentioned to understand that we're not always going to get it right. We're going to make mistakes, and that we're all, despite our titles or degrees, in fact, lifelong learners. So let's take a look at the specific ways cultural humility can support each of the 4 principles of VISTA service: building capacity, empowering communities, ending poverty, and creating sustainable solutions. Capacity building through the lens of cultural humility helps us apply what we've learned so far to some of the work that you're already doing. The terms used here, like quality of life and transformational, for example, how would you describe a healthy and good quality of life, or transformational technical support? How would your boss, your colleagues, your students, clients, donors? Learning about how everyone around you would define these kinds of terms is a fun, interesting, and invaluable way to learn. But assuming you know what a good and healthy quality of life looks like, or assuming that what you consider transformational technical support looks like how others think it looks, without figuring out whether or not people around you agree with that definition, can, depending on the project, do the opposite of build capacity. It may change things in the short term, but it may not be the changes a community wants or needs, and therefore not a change that outlasts you. Note the verbs here on this slide: listening, learning, co-designing, facilitating, and building capacity. You're probably starting to notice that I keep repeating words like these in this presentation. And while they seem basic and doable, it's important to note that in our society, those in positions of power don't typically begin by saying something like, "I want to hear from you first." Have you ever heard a teacher say that to their students on the first day of class, for example? We live in a society that believes if you have a position that says you know something, you're the expert. But many of us can think of examples where that was not the case. So how do we shift the model? How do we make sustainable change? What if we began the work from a place of not knowing, from a place of humility? Over the past couple of slides, we looked at how cultural humility can help us build capacity. Now let's consider what applying cultural humility to empowering others looks like. If setting aside what we believe is right and good for the community, and instead listening and learning to what the community believes is right and good, then together you and the community consider what's possible, so that collectively the community develops strategies for improvement. It's not easy. Anyone who's done a group project in school can tell you that sometimes it's even harder to work with others than to do something by yourself. But the impact of empowering others in the community to do the work is more sustainable because it will outlast you. It becomes bigger than you. It creates lasting change. And if there's anything I know about VISTA members, it's the dedication, commitment, and hope for real change in this world. Cultural humility can help build capacity and empower others. It can then work to make change, the kind of change that drew you to VISTA, transformational change like alleviating poverty. Here's an example from my own experience, and it is also around financial literacy. So my placement as an AmeriCorps member included working at a high school. And during a unit I was asked to teach called Managing Money, I learned that most of the students' families did not use banks. They didn't trust them. At the time I learned this, I did not have a section of the curriculum dedicated to understanding how banks work and what the benefits and/or risks associated with banking might be. I had to confront my own implicit bias. I used and trusted banks. I knew banks to be trustworthy. So I pivoted. I added to the curriculum, but then I realized I myself didn't really know enough about how banks worked. I couldn't teach something that I didn't understand. So I contacted a local bank, a credit union based in the Bronx, and asked if anyone who worked there at the bank would be willing to come speak with a group of high school students about their job. 3 representatives from the bank agreed and traveled to the school to meet with the students and answer questions the students had about banking. They were well versed in the reasons people might be hesitant about banking and were able to speak directly to those issues I myself didn't understand. Since the students themselves did not yet need banking services, it's not clear how many of them went on to use banks in the future. However, their questions about where the money given to the banks went, the difference between a checking and a savings account, and the difference between a credit and a debit card were addressed. This information would help the students make informed decisions in the future. Because cultural humility values partnerships, the work we do as VISTAs will ideally outlast our VISTA service. When we begin from a place of openness and teachability, we can learn from those in the community about what they really need and want versus what we think the community needs or wants. When we humble ourselves to understand that we don't know it all, we can learn from our partners, colleagues, and community members. Then the work will deepen and expand. It might be easier to do projects on our own, but doing things on our own is the least sustainable way to make lasting change. We have to work together alongside those who will be directly impacted by the work we do. If we don't take into account the various cultural aspects of the community we're working with, the effectiveness of our projects can be negatively impacted. So here's another example from my personal experience. John was a freshman at the same high school I mentioned in the previous example. He was in my colleague Nick's first period ESL class. John often arrived late to class, even after Mr. Nick's repeated reminders to arrive on time. One morning, John was late again. Frustrated and thinking it was time for John to learn a difficult lesson about the importance of arriving to school on time, Mr. Nick refused to let John in the classroom. John knocked on the classroom door, but Mr. Nick shook his head and pointed to the clock. Seconds later, the glass on the classroom door shattered. John, angry at not being let into the classroom, had punched the glass window of the door. Later, in the office with the principal, Mr. Nick learned the reason for John's repeated tardiness. John was often in charge of taking his little brother to school, an elementary school several blocks away. John's brother's school began 15 minutes after ours did at the high school, making it impossible for John to take his little brother to school and arrive at Mr. Nick's class on time. Had Mr. Nick began a conversation with John with cultural humility by using curiosity and then listening to John, the frustration Mr. Nick felt, plus a broken classroom door, could have likely been avoided altogether. Instead, Mr. Nick relied on his own biases about why kids arrived late to school and assumed John's repeated tardiness was a sign of laziness or disrespect. What happened between Mr. Nick and John was separate from the work I did as a VISTA, but it was not unrelated, because what happened in the building that day affected all of us at the school, and it was all the students wanted to talk about. To them, it represented larger issues about our school community. Not shying away from those conversations with students deepened the work I did as a VISTA. It gave voice to concerns the students had and allowed all of us to turn from the incident back to the task at hand with more trust and resiliency. So now I'll hand it back to Stephen for a poll question.
Yeah, Lisa, I genuinely want to thank you for sharing that. I know it takes a lot of vulnerability. Myself, as an AmeriCorps member, worked in schools. I know we have a lot of VISTAs on this call who either work directly in schools or related to education, and just really grateful for you sharing that example. I think we could all relate to that, and see in the chat, there's a bunch of people who have similar stories, so thank you. All of us have now seen an example of what cultural humility looks like or doesn't look like in practice. We want to take a quick review here. And so in a moment, a poll is going to pop up on your screen. And the poll is, which of the following is not an aspect of cultural humility? So A, practicing self-evaluation, B, comparing groups of people, C, recognizing power imbalances, or D, honoring customs, beliefs, and values. So give folks just a moment to answer that poll. I see folks are responding, doing great. Give folks another few seconds here. Great job. Thank you all so much for responding here, for the wonderful comments in the chat. This is a really wonderful group, and again, appreciate checking in here. We got a little bit more content to share of where we are, and based on this, Lisa is going to be able to kind of customize some more support for us. So take one more second and answer if you haven't already. We can share those results though, and the answer. So the correct answer was B, and that's comparing groups of people. It's not cultural humility, right? What Lisa was just sharing, cultural humility involves practicing self-evaluation, recognizing that power imbalances may exist, and honoring the customs, beliefs, and values of the community. I see Lina and Valeria sharing some great examples of that in the chat as well. Cultural humility does not involve comparing and contrasting the community you're serving to other communities. So I want to encourage you now, we're about halfway through. If you've got questions that were sparked by these examples, if this poll question raised any questions as well, please feel free to open up the Q&A. We would love to have a great chat and question and answer with you when the presentation's over. So I will turn this back over to Lisa to talk about how we practice cultural humility.
Great, thanks, Stephen. Now that we know what cultural humility is, let's discuss some tools and strategies you might use to put it into practice. These are the key attributes of cultural humility: openness, self-reflection, awareness, lifelong learning, institutional accountability, empathy and compassion, to be other-oriented, and acknowledging balance and power imbalances. We've touched on several of these already, and again, they seem like no-brainers, but many of them are contrary to workplace culture. Some of these terms are even often gendered, aren't they? I've also heard of these terms, including the word of the day, humility, described as soft skills. I call soft skills real skills, because all of these connotations that we use to describe words matter. They actually have power. Would you see any of these words on a job description, for example, or on a resume? Why or why not? I wouldn't really be doing my job today if I didn't acknowledge that these are not the set of skills we're taught as Americans to believe will get us rich or ahead or into positions of power. So why should we adopt them? Well, because they work, and because we're a part of a program like VISTA, and VISTA members go where the need is greatest. And we all know how high the stakes are in places where the need is greatest. Whatever this country has done in the past to alleviate poverty hasn't worked, or it hasn't worked yet. Let's try another way. Let's humble ourselves enough to see that we've got to reimagine what our country can look like if we employ strategies like cultural humility. Let's look at our next activity with Stephen.
Lisa, thanks for those words. And the chat gives me a lot of hope. The folks on this webinar today, I think, will embrace those principles. I know are working to fight poverty every day at their VISTA sites. So I want to revisit the handout that we shared earlier. We will share that link one more time. Thank you, Misty, for posting that in the chat. Feel free to pull it up if you have it on your computer, or again, just think through this based on what Lisa just shared. On page 2 of the handout, you will see what Lisa just discussed, the key attributes of cultural humility. You'll also see an example for each one. We know there are a lot, there's a lot of places to write, but just for a couple of moments, I want you to take one or two that stand out to you, that really are relevant to your site, and take a moment and think about how it applies to your VISTA service. Once you're done, please feel free to share some of the answers in the chat so we can all learn from each other. We hope this is a great opportunity to share some ideas with your VISTA colleagues across the country. So again, we're going to pause. We're going to give you a couple moments to write down your thoughts. If you've got questions, put them in the Q&A, and please feel free to share in the chat based on what you're putting on your handout. So take a moment. We will shout out some of the chat questions. I would love to get Lisa's thoughts as well. And good luck, everyone. right. Great job, everyone. I can see folks are really engaged here, and I know there are a lot of elements of cultural humility. This may take you a little bit of time, so I would encourage you after this webinar, go through, look at the examples, fill in the parts that are going to be relevant for your project. I really appreciate the folks sharing in the chat. Just like Lisa sharing her story, it takes a lot of bravery and courage to do this and talk about your VISTA service in this way. Thank you. I love some of the comments I've seen already. I know lots more are coming in, keep them coming. But Michael sharing about us having to really reflect on our different competencies. Emerson sharing about lifelong learning. Yeah, really cool to be able to engage with trainings. Y'all, we've had a very challenging last few years, but pretty great that we now have so many opportunities virtually to engage with training and to connect with people in a way that was more difficult before. Openness from Oscar. Yeah, really working on bringing people in to formulate a solution and frame a problem. I'm gonna pass to Lisa here. Any of these comments jumping out to you? I think these are really wonderful, and I know there's a lot of them.
Yeah, they're really great. I was noticing Leah from Alaska. She's talking about getting to her site and understanding that there's a prominent Native culture as well as some immigrant families from cultures that she doesn't know about, and she kind of ends her note with saying, like, I have to take the time to understand these cultures and it will be important for my service year. And so yes, I just encourage you to do that, right? And a great way to do that is to ask questions, which allows for community building anyway, because then you're building relationships and trust with your community as well as learning about them at the same time. So yeah, thanks to everyone who's kind of thinking about this and considering how it might apply to the work that they're doing, because that's where it will really all happen.
Yeah, I totally agree. And again, I want to appreciate everybody for your flexibility here and understanding. It's sometimes a little tough to do this virtually, and I know not enough time, but thank you for sharing such wonderful things. Would really encourage you all to scroll through this chat and look at what your colleagues are doing. I think this is really, really wonderful. So Lisa, if there's anything else stood out to you, feel free to share it, but I know you've got a little bit more here to talk through with us.
Yeah, I like Valeria saying to stay positive. It's really true. This work is not easy, and staying positive is a big part of it. Enthusiasm, I think, is one of the greatest things you can bring to the table. Sometimes that's being silly. Sometimes that's telling a dumb joke. These kinds of things matter as much as changing the world matters, because we can't do it without enthusiasm and keeping positive. So thanks for mentioning that, Valeria. All right, as you saw in the reflection activity, there are several attributes to practicing cultural humility, and practicing cultural humility will probably look different at the beginning, the middle, and the end of your project. The beginning will include a lot of information gathering, like we talked about, asking questions, listening, being curious, all the while interrogating your own biases and initial judgments. Then you build the relationships with partners and stakeholders and assess the problem and possible outcomes together. Finally, cultural humility will require all the patience and persistence big group projects require, when lots of people coming together to create a sustainable project plan built to build capacity, engage the community, and alleviate poverty. As I've said before, it is not easy and it is no small task. This community toolbox will help you understand your community. It has some best practices, templates, and several other resources for community development and assessment. So please take a look at that and use it if it's helpful. In addition to the key attributes for practicing cultural humility mentioned a few slides ago, here are some steps you can take to develop cultural humility at your site. This is for both relocating VISTA members and non-relocating VISTA members. Here's an opportunity. Remember when we talked about the definition of a good and healthy quality of life at the beginning of the presentation? What if you began your next meeting by asking everyone at the table, including yourself, to answer that question? Then let others lead the conversation into discussion about the responses. Were the responses similar, different? How will the responses have an impact on the project, if any? How will it impact the very meeting you're about to have? Should everyone be on the same page about what constitutes a good and healthy quality of life? Why or why not? There are countless ways to begin your own practice of cultural humility at your project site, and they're really fun opportunities. The practice of cultural humility is a chance to make the work better, to improve your relationship with your colleagues and clients, and to go where the need is greatest with enthusiasm, hope, and the reminder that one person can do great things, but together we really can change the world. All right, I'll turn it back over to Stephen for a final review question.
Yeah, Lisa, thank you for that. And this question is great because it's similar to what I saw in the chat from a couple people share about working on some food related projects. Here is the scenario. As part of a VISTA team, you're responsible for organizing a pop-up food bank in an area where there's a large number of families with specific cultural food preferences and restrictions. Your task is to determine the approach to stock the food bank, thinking about all the cultural humility practices Lisa shared with us today. So in a moment, a pop-up is going to appear on your screen with the poll. You can open that question. The question is, which of the following activities most embodies a mindset rooted in cultural humility? A, research the family's culture online, decide which practice is it's a food source based on what you find. B is to talk to a potential food donor to see what they think. C is to seek advice from some of the families about which foods they'd like to see stocked in the food bank. And D, reconsider if a food bank is a useful resource for the community. So I'm going to give you a moment to think and share. Thanks to everyone who has already voted here. Take a moment and we'll come back in just a minute. Give folks just a few more seconds here. If you haven't had a chance to put in your answer, please do so. And we will start to close it out here. Thank you all so much for participating. We appreciate all of you. So the best answer in this scenario is going to be C. And that is to seek advice from some of the families about which foods they'd like to see stocked in the food bank. And appreciate everyone for participating, no matter what answer you put. I think it's really important to have these conversations to reflect on how we can serve our communities as best as possible. And so I again want to thank you for your participation today. We hope, in addition to identifying some cultural humility practices like the one in the scenario, we hope you'll leave today's webinar with some practical asset-based strategies you can use to engage your community VISTA project. In a moment, we're gonna have some time for a Q&A with Lisa. So thanks to folks who've already done this. Would encourage you, share any questions you have in the Q&A. We don't wanna lose them in the chat. With any ideas you're exploring for your site. We'd love to get specific with you and give some support with such a great resource like Lisa. As we're learning more about cultural humility, though, we encourage you to check out some of the sites mentioned on the screen for further information about the topics covered today. We'll reshare the webinar handout in the chat if you need it. The resources are on page 4. This is a really detailed topic, and we really encourage you to explore this more. Hope these are some helpful resources that can benefit you at your site. A friendly reminder is that we will continue to post recordings of monthly webinars and the handouts on the VISTA campus. They should be up within a couple of days. You'll just need to navigate to the campus at learn.americorps.gov and log in. Definitely feel free to let us know if you're having any difficulties. We'd love to help you access this resource. Hope it can help you with your VISTA service. And once you're logged in, you can click on the catalog where you'll see the red square on the screen. That will bring you to all the learning paths available. And we'll post today's webinar under the project development learning path. You can also find a bunch of other great resources there for your project from past webinars. You can search for it, or you can filter by member resources. If it's your first time joining this learning path, you will have to enroll in it and join it. It takes just a couple clicks. And once you've joined the learning path, you can browse through all those available webinars at your leisure. We would love to get your feedback on this webinar as well. We are always reviewing the content, working to make it better for VISTA members. We appreciate your ideas for how we can improve this presentation for future Vistas. So we'll share that link in the chat. We appreciate all of you. With that, though, we are going to take a moment and transition to question and answer. So I really appreciate Lisa for sharing so many great things throughout the webinar today. I'm going to ask a couple of the questions I see in the chat. I've got some as well. Let's start with a question from Hannah. This is a great one. Do you think that some level of initial cultural competency is required to help lay the groundwork for practicing cultural humility?
Yes, absolutely, Hannah. I think the best parts about cultural competence are the learning that cultural competence inspires. It really compels and it really encourages people to learn about the culture that they're serving. I think where it stops short is that it doesn't allow for the self-reflection piece of that. And it also doesn't allow for the learning with people instead of learning about people, right? If you're working in a community, it's helpful to learn about that community, but it's more helpful to learn with that community. And it's also more helpful to understand how your own implicit biases and your own background might impact judgments you might just be making subconsciously about the culture that you're learning about. So yes, I agree. Cultural competency is a good foundation, but we kind of have to go beyond that, because what ends up happening is if you learn about a culture, then you think you can become an expert in it, and you might make judgments without realizing it, and then you move forward with the work with those judgments, and you're moving forward in the work alone, which is not as sustainable as working with your community. But yes, thank you for the question.
Thanks so much, Lisa. I got another question here from Jaylene. In practicing cultural humility, how can we navigate difficult situations without seeming dismissive of traumatic circumstances?
Yeah, that is a challenge for sure. I think a lot of times when I hear people share things that I don't understand, or maybe myself have not experienced, right? Empathy is always a great tool, but sometimes we actually can't use empathy because we have not experienced something similar. I'll often use the phrase, I don't have the words right now, but I'm so grateful that you shared. So that allows for them to understand that I might not understand, but I am grateful that they shared, and I'm grateful that they felt confident and safe enough to share, but that I don't have the capacity, right? And then another tool that I use sometimes is I'll say, are you asking, thank you for sharing the same thing, right? Are you asking for advice, or are you hoping that I'll just listen? Because sometimes people just want to share and they don't need your help. They just want someone to listen to them. Sometimes they really are looking for you with find resources. And so I'll use that as well. I'll say, thank you for sharing. I don't have the words right now, but are you hoping that are you looking for advice? Or are you just really looking for someone to listen? And you'll be surprised. You would think most people would say, oh, I'm just looking for someone to listen, but oftentimes they really are looking for advice. And if you don't have that advice, then you can get back to them later with that advice by reaching out to other people who might know. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, Lisa, I really appreciate you sharing that. It's such good advice, and that definitely helped me in my AmeriCorps service. Definitely something I'm trying to work on as well. I see a really nice question from an anonymous attendee. I think this relates to our work as well. Do you have specific recommendations for how to approach situations with cultural humility as someone working with the government? This could be serving groups who have a valid distrust of past government involvement.
Absolutely. That is a real issue. I experienced that both in AmeriCorps and certainly in Peace Corps. I like to just say it. I mean, one way of kind of talking about that, when you either have heard other people talking about it or it's an issue, is just to say it. Say, I work for, this is a government organization. And so there might be thoughts and feelings around that. And I'm, generally happy to listen to them. If you have concerns, I'm happy to hear them. But yeah, sometimes just putting it out there and acknowledging it is helpful. I found that in general, a lot of times I would say they would have had prior experience with someone, either from AmeriCorps or Peace Corps or just the government in general, that was lending itself to them to this trust. And again, it was the situation of, I don't have the words right now, but thank you for sharing, and just being that person that they kind of can like talk about this previous problem with. And realizing that it's not necessarily personal. It's just that there was a prior experience that led them to believe this. And so, yeah, I kind of think just saying it sometimes can be helpful. I hope that's helpful. Thank you for the question.
Lisa, I think that was great. I see another good question from Oscar. In talking with a community in need, we may find that one or two very responsive or vocal stakeholders might be answering on behalf of many more. How can we be sure we're really helping the folks in need in the way they need it in the community?
Oh, yes, such a good question. Thank you, Oscar. So so again, there's this thing of just kind of telling it like it is, right? So I would, one way to kind of go about that is to say, thank you for always having a response and for being so vocal and passionate about this issue. How can you help us? How can we work together to hear more voices, right? It acknowledges that they're passionate about the topic and they have a lot to say, and then it encourages them it builds a partnership with someone who is passionate and vocal to help expand the project. So if you're worried about hearing from more people, it's then work with the people who are already talking. It's one way to help build capacity and make the work sustainable. But I know at times it can feel like, they're just the same two voices over and over. And it's really common and normal. But I would say just harness that enthusiasm and passion and voice and help them get the word out to other people, work together. Yeah. Thanks, Oscar.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Oscar. I see another question here about how can you act with cultural humility if there's a custom or belief that you have ethical objections to? Could be the treatment of women, what constitutes appropriate discipline for children, or treatment of gender and sexual minorities. Do you have any advice for this one, Lisa?
Yeah, that happened in my Peace Corps experience. I lived in a village that the custom of genital mutilation was practiced. And I think there are a lot of ways to approach this, and I really do encourage you to reach out to your VISTA leader and other VISTA members and other people that you look up to and support for their thoughts. The way that I personally dealt with that is that I just opted out. I opted out of really engaging with that particular topic. And I just, when it came up, which it didn't that often, I tried to be polite, but I didn't engage with I just didn't engage with the project because I was there as a health volunteer. So one would say that falls under the umbrella. I opted out, and that was for my own personal reasons, just because I felt it was beyond my capacity, but also because I realized that I had too many biases and judgments that it was not going to be helpful. But that was just my own personal experience, but I do encourage you, this is a really hard topic and it comes up a lot, and it's really good that you're thinking about it. This is the self-evaluation part of cultural humility. So you're already in the right place asking the question. And yeah, again, I just encourage you to reach out to other people you really trust and look up to seek their thoughts as well. But thank you for the question.
Lisa, thanks for sharing that. And thanks for the question, folks. I see another good one from Hannah, and that's, how do you suggest VISTAs navigate institutional accountability aspect of cultural humility within a sponsor organization that might struggle with institutional accountability at higher levels? And I just to expand on that, I've heard this from other VISTA members as well. What would you just recommend in general in adopting cultural humility practices when you're facing any kind of resistance at your organization?
Yeah, I mean, so it's sort of a lead by example. Sometimes the best thing we can do is lead by example. And And part of cultural humility is really holding organizations in power accountable. But that requires that there's a way to do that, right? That can be more effective than others. And it depends on the organization that you're in and the structures in place. But again, I think starting with yourself, evaluating what it is that you're noticing that is, that causing you to think there are these issues at the high levels of the organization, and just starting from that point can be helpful, because sometimes we think that it's so easy to judge how an organization is operating, especially a big one. And it's sometimes we know what's really going on, and sometimes we don't. And so I think just acknowledging that first off with that self-reflection piece is really important. But then again, if it is a problem, you will hear about it, right? You're going to continually hear about it. And if your community and the partnerships that you're making and the people that are with you in that community keep talking about it, it will make its way up to where it needs to go. It might not happen right away, and it's frustrating to have to wait. But I think that if it is really a problem within the community, then it will become an issue that the higher levels of the organization will be forced to hear about. So those are just a couple of words of advice, but I know that it's really hard. And I think just starting with that first piece, and then the additional learning, being curious, right? What's happening? Who are the people at the top? Can I meet them? Can I get to know them? That kind of a thing. I hope that's helpful. Thank you for the question.
Lisa, it's great. And thank you. I know there are some similar questions in that vein. I also just want to share, there are some other support for you here. First of all, us at the VISTA training unit, the VISTA member support unit. If you're feeling like you could use some backup or questions, do not hesitate to reach out. I'll also say there is training on the VISTA campus on these topics of how to start service strong, of how to work with supervisors. We also provide training for VISTA leaders and sponsors, right? That could be a good starting point on these same principles. So we are all a team. We're working together. We are very much imperfect though, but want to work with you to make sure not only is your service successful, but the organization you work with has the tools they need to do this important work in the community. So thanks for that question, Lisa. Thanks for the answer. I see Genesis shared a question. In practicing cultural humility in that same topic, do you have any recommendations on how to approach it from the community? One person seeks help because even if they are from that community, they don't feel as though they share their community's beliefs. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think if someone is coming to you and they're looking for help, and they don't feel a part of the community in which they're in, it's an opportunity to bring them into your community, the community you're building as a VISTA, right? So again, those tools that I was talking about earlier, thanks for sharing. Are you looking for advice, or do you just need someone to listen? That might be a good place to start. It's possible they might just need someone to listen because they are feeling like an outsider, or they might be really looking for ways to get involved, in which case that's an opportunity for a partnership. So I think, yeah, it's great that they feel comfortable coming to you, and it's a good place to start is just by asking that very question, would you're hoping I just listen, or are you looking for advice here? And then if they ask for advice and you're not sure what to do, again, like Stephen says, reaching out to your other VISTA members or leader or the VISTA community at large to seek advice on where to go next.
Lisa, thank you for that. I want to let you share some closing words, some advice for our amazing VISTA members here. But I do see Valeria with a question about pop-up food donations. I think this would be a great question for the VISTA community. So if there are folks in the chat or on VISTA Connect that have done a pop-up food drive or food bank, would love for folks to be able to share that. I think the VISTA community could really be helpful there. But I appreciate you and what you're doing. Thank you so much. I do want to pass it to Lisa, though, just for some closing thoughts before we wrap up.
Thanks, Stephen. Thank you, everyone, for having me here today. It's such an honor to be here. I have such great respect for VISTA and VISTA members. Thank you for the work that you're doing out in the world. I appreciate you, and I wish you the very best as you continue on in your projects. And just thank you again for having me here today.
Lisa, thank you. We are so grateful for your expertise. Again, please feel free, Q&A. I put our email in the chat. I probably emailed you this morning too. Please feel free to keep the conversation going and let us know if you've got questions. But I do also want to plug our really great resource, VISTA Connect. That is a wonderful way to keep the conversation moving. You can find this on the VISTA campus. You can use the topics forum to share best practices, connect with your colleagues about cultural humility and more. See, there was already good advice about getting licenses for food banks. Awesome. There's even a new feature on VISTA Connect that allows you to upload resources and share them with VISTA colleagues. It's on the Connect side of the campus in the gray menu bar on VISTA Connect. You'll see the Explore drop-down menu. You can open the Explore menu and select groups. On the list of groups, you'll select members, and then look for the link to resources in the medium blue menu bar towards the right-hand side. You'll see a button to create a resource. You'll click that to open the form, and you'll enter some information about the resource and describe how it can be used. You can attach any Word document, Excel worksheet, PowerPoint, PDF. Click Save, and your resource will be queued for review. And once it's approved, it'll appear on the site, and you can share it. This is a brand new feature. You'll be among one of the first folks to upload resources and start building the library of tools that we can use to share with peers. So we hope this is one more way the VISTA campus can support your VISTA service, and we appreciate all of you trying it out. We also hope you can join us for our next webinar. That will be on Wednesday, May 24th. It'll be about developing a written communication strategy. So if you communicate by email, social media, if you write anything in your job, I think this will be a really helpful one. It'll be next month. We really look forward to seeing you May 24th at 3 p.m. And you can take a look at where to register for the May webinar on the VISTA campus. Click calendar on the main menu, and a blue or green dot will show the event for that day. When you click on May 24th, you'll see that description appear below, and you'll also see the registration link. So we hope to see you then. We are really grateful for you being here and for your service. I want to share another thank you to Lisa for sharing her expertise today, for Chris for helping out in the chat and Q&A, our LSI team. On behalf of all of us at AmeriCorps, thank you for serving as a VISTA member, for your participation today. We wish you all the success in the world this year. This concludes today's webinar, and thank you so much for your service.